And well, let's just begin with perhaps you could share with us, what do you see that's important to name as we enter this conversation together?
And you have been in those situations where somebody used faith or religion to harm you, I would just like to invite you to maybe just say to your nervous system and your mind that what this is today, we're not going to use faith in that way. We're going to use faith in the way that I believe it's meant to be used, which is to heal and to connect and to provide love and connection for each other. For example, one negative conclusion that a lot of children come to when bad things happen to them or evil things happen to them is, I must be bad. I'm bad because, all of these things are happening to me. So in EMDR, if somebody has come to that conclusion, we would offer the opposite. So we would say, your conclusion was, I am bad. And the opposite of that is, I am good enough. Those children grow up to be adults that don't know how to have boundaries and to keep themselves safe, because that is something that we have to learn. When I work with survivors, I'm very careful to say what happened was that you were in an unsafe environment. It was not safe. And so now what we're doing is we're trying to create a safe enough environment, and some safe, presence in your own body and some ability to have safe intimacy with a core group of people.
Yeah.
Because this is an area that most people, as you said, they get really uncomfortable. They don't know how to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there needs to be a container that actually allows that. And to even see, what that might begin to look like, that would invite people to be curious and to invite people to care more. So welcome back to the Healing You Method podcast.
This is a space for warm, grounded conversations about healing, embodiment, relationships, and transformation.
And today we're here with Veronica Thompson. Veronica is a licensed clinical social worker and survivor whose work integrates trauma-informed clinical care with biblically grounded framework. So she helps individuals, families, and faith communities respond to trauma with clarity, integrity, hope, and nervous system safety.
Veronica, welcome. We're really glad you're here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, wonderful. And well, let's just begin with perhaps you could share with us, what do you see that's important to name as we enter this conversation together?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing to name is that people have religious trauma. People, so I'm a person of faith. And so when I'm talking about trauma, I really like to start off by acknowledging that people have been in situations where people who have power over them have used religion to harm people. There have also been people have used religious rationales for not protecting the powerless. And my specialty is childhood sexual abuse. And so this happens a lot in childhood sexual abuse, where the child is expected to carry, how I would say it in the church is the child is meant to carry the sins of the community. And so if you're out there and you have been in those situations where somebody used faith or religion to harm you, I would just like to invite you to maybe just say to your nervous system and your mind that what this is today, we're not going to use faith in that way. We're going to use faith in the way that I believe it's meant to be used, which is to heal and to connect and to provide love and connection for each other.
Oh, that's
Thank
really
you. Thank
beautiful.
you.
And yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to call a little pause right there, because I want to acknowledge this is a very tender topic. And it can be very triggering. And so I just want to hold that with exceptional care.
Mhm.
And your core message is so clear that healing is not about trying harder spiritually.
Mhm.
It's really about restoring that safety in the body, in the relationships, and in our understanding of God.
Mhm.
So I'd love to invite you to just open that up a little bit more for us.
Yeah, so I think that there have been, so when we talk about PTSD, one of the symptoms of PTSD is looking at conclusions that people have come to about the world and about themselves that are harmful. That can happen to us as individuals, but it can also happen to institutions. So if the church has come to the conclusion that, or a conclusion, let's say, we'll refer to more specific ones later, but if the church has come to conclusions that are harmful to the people who are in the community, then they're going to start acting in alignment with those conclusions. That is to say, um, what's really important are these worldly things that are going on, meaning the financial support for the community, the building of the number of people in the seats, the amount of fun people say that they have, at church. Oftentimes, the administration of the church is looking to get wealthy, and that's a sad fact, but it is a fact nonetheless. And so the church can come to these conclusions that, oh, our job is to look perfect for people and to be this in, this space where people can come and feel good about themselves and have some fun and then go home. And I really reject all of those things as what the meaning of faith and spirituality is supposed to be. And so if we look at what is actually in the Christian faith, especially in the New Testament, Jesus is really talking about the powerless. He's talking about healing people. He's calling out religious leaders and people who are in power. And so I think one of the conclusions, the main conclusions that is harmful, I think, to survivors, to people who don't have a lot of power, to institutions, and in general, our culture, is the idea of the individual as, this island that is supposed to do everything on their own and to be on their own and to heal on their own. Um, and there's also this financial factor as well. So the healing has become something that is very expensive. And I'm a therapist, so I know that people have to live. And so I say this with, I don't have exactly the answer. I think that using the communities of faith as a place where people can get healing when they don't have a lot of money and they can't afford, sometimes therapy is $150 a session, $200 a session. And again, I understand people have to live, but we have to start thinking about universally healing people in our communities and engaging with the communities as and not leaving all of the healing just to the survivor to do on his or her own in therapy and for people who can afford it. And so that's why I believe very deeply in therapy. I very, very deeply. Um, my family will tease me that my answer to everything is, you really should go to therapy. And so I'm not dismissing the importance of it. I'm just saying that it's time that we come out of the therapy rooms and we start having conversations to think about how we can change a society that has gotten to be overly individualistic, and we've lost some of those community places where people seek healing and connection, and to sort of influence the church in a way to say, you're focusing on these other things like money and big bands that are loud and getting huge amounts of people in the church which you're succeeding in, but then those people are not connecting and they're not healing. So that's kind of where what I'm trying to do now.
Yeah.
So it sounds like maybe educating people more. I mean, actually kind of showing the big picture and then showing the details or the gaps where there are things that are falling through, just to even begin with some shared reality around what is the conversation.
Yes, exactly. People are, often ask me, where do you start? And I think education is the right place to start, is to sort of, I think people want, I like to talk about the conclusions that people have come to that can then get them onto the wrong path. And I think one of the conclusions that people can come to that can do that is the conclusion that I'm supposed to be safe all the time. I'm supposed to feel comfortable all the time. Now, feeling safe and comfortable is very important, and that is a big component of my work as a therapist, and I've also been through my own therapy. And so finding internal safety for myself, finding safety in my most intimate relationships with my immediate family members who I have ongoing relationships with, that is very important. But when we go out into the world and we really face some of the things that are evil, and I would categorize childhood sexual abuse as one of those evils, that's going to be hard. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be difficult. And I can tell you, as somebody who has a lot of experience talking to people about this who are not experts and have not, done a lot of work around it, it does make people really uncomfortable. People don't particularly like to talk about it. And so there are a lot of people who have done a lot of work on sharing their stories. And I would say the last few decades, therapy has really, gotten to be something that, probably a large percentage of people do in our culture. And I just want to invite people to say, that's great. That's a wonderful first step that we've established this safety for ourselves. And I think now we have, I would really love to see people band together a little bit more and then go out into communities and say, we're not here to show up at church and put on our best clothes and pretend to be perfect and then go home. We're here because we know that in our culture alone, let's just talk about the United States, is the largest consumer of childhood porn. 25% of females are abused sexually before they reach the age of 18, 20% of boys, and those are probably low numbers. So a huge amount of that is going on. And then there's just so many broken homes. I worked in child protection services and foster care. So, and then we have marginalized communities, and I would really love to see people come together a little bit more and sort of say, okay, we're not here to pretend these things don't exist. And I do see that a lot. We have to come together to say, what are we going to do about all of this suffering in our communities? What are we going to do about the evil that's being perpetuated against powerless people, children in particular? And how do we come together and heal now that we've learned to create our own safety and to sort of articulate our own stories?
Yeah. Yeah, what I'm really hearing from you is that, well, maybe what I'm hearing, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that yes, as an individual, we need to do our healing, but there's a much bigger picture there in that the system
Yeah.
is involved, and I would almost say like the system needs to see its role and start to take responsibility and want to change, and not sort of leave it that it's just the individual. This has happened to the individual with what you said. Okay, dress up nicely and go to church and pretend that these terrible things haven't been happening to people that, yeah. And so when we think about that, could you maybe just say a little bit how you would see it switching from people not looking at trauma or what has how they are because of trauma. They, we've had a tendency in our society to look at it as a character flaw
Yeah.
rather than it being a nervous system response to a horrible, overwhelming experience. Can you say a bit to us about this?
Yeah, a nervous system response, and also, in therapy, so I do a lot of different types of therapy, so I know different models. So one of the models that I do is EMDR. And so anybody familiar with EMDR will know that there are those cognitive distortions that we look at. And that's related to what I was mentioning before. One of the symptoms of PTSD is negative conclusions about yourself or about the world. So, for example, one negative conclusion that a lot of children come to when bad things happen to them or evil things happen to them is, I must be bad. I'm bad because, all of these things are happening to me. So, in EMDR, if somebody has come to that conclusion, we would offer the opposite. So, we would say, your conclusion was, I am bad. And the opposite of that is I am good enough. So one of the negative conclusions that people can come to is I am not safe. And so the opposite of that would be I am safe enough. So if we think about this, this is people can say, just as you said, Gail, that there's something wrong with the child or the adult who has carried this conclusion throughout his or her life because they think that they're not safe. They don't feel safe, and their nervous system is telling them that they're not safe. But it is actually a true conclusion. They were not safe. And so
Mm,
it's not pathological at all. It is an accurate understanding of the situation that they were in. And when children are raised and throughout their development, they're not ever safe and they're not ever protected. That is not a pathological conclusion to say I'm not safe because they genuinely are not safe. They don't know how to keep themselves safe. So if you have somebody who from the time they were very young was physically abused, so there's violence perpetrated against them or sexually abused, those children grow up to be adults that don't know how to have boundaries and to keep themselves safe because that is something that we have to learn. It's not
Yeah.
intuitive that we would know how to do that. And so that's something we have to teach our children how to do. And
yeah.
so when we, again, I think that there is far too much um, individual pathology projected onto survivors to say, oh, there's something went wrong with you because you have all of these symptoms. And when I work with survivors, I'm very careful to say what happened was that you were in an unsafe environment. It was not safe. And so now what we're doing is we're trying to create a safe enough environment
Mhm.
and some safe you know, presence in your own body and some ability to have safe intimacy with a core group of people.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. So beautifully said, Veronica, to really make that clear. And as you were chatting, I had another misunderstanding, I guess, that maybe you could speak to as well, because what I've experienced in from religion, many religions, is the belief that forgiveness automatically requires reconciliation or restored access. And
Mhm.
so I was wondering if you could chat a little bit about that with us. Like, why do these ideas get collapsed together so often? And how would you separate them so that people could build and have more experience of actually really knowing what true safety is, what true trust is?
Yeah, that is so important because one of the ways that children are scapegoated and placed in harm's way and maintained in unsafe situations is by exactly what you just said. This idea that they get from their Christian community to say, you need to forgive this person and move on. And then
Mm,
nothing changes.
mhm.
And they have learned nothing. So forgiveness is a process that can happen if the what I would call the Christian process, some people might see it differently, but for me in my mind, it is a Christian process that plays out. And so there is first a confession, and then there's repentance or an acknowledgement of the harm that you caused to the child. And then there is safety, boundaries. And then once, excuse me, once that process is played out, then the child or the survivor can be in a place where they're safe and strong, and then they can see that this person has made a decision that was harmful to them, harmful to both parties, but that perpetrator carried all of the consequences of that behavior, and then the survivor can decide when and if they ever want to sort of say I forgive this person. But that plays out because when a survivor or child is asked to carry the consequences of abuse and somebody says, just forgive this perpetrator. And so, see, child sexual abuse is my specialty, so I'm going to stay there for now. So, if somebody sexually abuses a child and then they say, forgive this person and move on, the child is going to be left with all of that nervous system um, uh, impact. They're going to be left with all of those negative conclusions that they've drawn about themselves. And then saying forgive and move on is actually going to reinforce those conclusions. It's going to say, it is okay that people harm you. And if people do harm you, there are no consequences, and we're not going to create any safety or boundaries for you. And not only that, but there's no justice for you. And the child will come to the conclusion that there must be something wrong with me in those cases, because
Mhm.
you can look into the world and see that there are justice for some people. We do see in the news, the Larry Nassar case, for example, those survivors got justice, and it really positively impacted them. If anybody is interested, you can read or listen to their survivor impact statements at the end of the trial, where they almost all of them say, this process restored me. It gave me my voice back.
Yeah.
And so when survivors see these types of cases and then they don't get justice, it can, there can be this internalizing message to say, well, they got justice, so, maybe people loved them and maybe they had support, but for me, that's not possible. And so again, it's this internalizing the symptoms for the survivor. And then it's the nervous system, but it's also dissociation is one of the things that survivors use really often as a way to cope with really uncomfortable situations. And so then you're robbing the survivor of his or her ability to stay present in their own life.
Mhm.
And then they have to carry all of that in their bodies. And what often happens is that then survivors can walk into things like addiction very easily because their community has given them the message, you have to deal with all of this nervous system stuff by yourself.
By yourself, yeah.
You just forgive this person who, doesn't have any consequences. And so then they can start to say, okay, well, when I drink, all that nervous system stuff goes away. Or when I do
Mhm.
drugs, it all goes away. And so it can lead the survivor down a path of real despair and suffering when they don't get justice and that process is not followed. Now, if we compare that to, let's say, the Larry Nassar case, where these girls were, if people are not familiar, I should maybe say what that case was. Larry Nassar was the doctor for the women's gymnasts, the United States women's gymnast group. And he sexually abused a very large number of girls that came through his care.
Over
And
like over 600.
yeah, I mean, it just was, the number is astounding. But those victims became survivors along that process. And he did confess eventually through the police interrogations. Um, and I don't know if he apologized. I didn't see him do that. But I mean, he's going to prison. So it's clear to him and to everybody that he did something wrong and that the consequences of that behavior are his to carry. And then on the other side of that, the survivors can come to let's think about those conclusions. Now, what conclusions have they come to? I'm worthy of attention. I'm worthy of justice. My community cares about me. I'm loved and I'm safe. And I know how to be safe because my community responded and supported me and loved me. And so that's the message I'm trying to carry out into the churches and hopefully from there sort of just disseminate into all of the places where children are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That is so important, and it's so huge too. The I like how you were able to really clearly define how when a survivor is being told to forgive quickly, but their body is still in that survival mode,
Mhm.
that opens up the door to an area that's not in service of their life, and
Mhm.
that they don't even know what they don't know.
Mhm.
And so again, coming back to that point that education is key, but it needs to be almost drip fed in a way that it can be received.
Yeah.
And that's true also for the institutions, for the community, because this is an area that most people, as you said, they get really uncomfortable. They don't know how to talk about it.
Mhm.
And so there
Yeah.
needs to be a container that actually allows that. And to even see, what that might begin to look like that would invite people to be curious and to invite people to care more.
Mhm. Well, I know I really do try to use my voice in all circumstances because I have spent a lot of time on my own healing journey. And I've worked through a lot of other people's healing journeys with them. And I really feel like I've been blessed to be around really loving professionals. So I went through my own therapy, but I'm a therapist, so I've been sort of surrounded by therapists throughout my life, which was really nice for me. And so I feel a responsibility to say, okay, I'm not just going to say I'm healed now, yay. It's like, yeah, I don't want this to keep happening to people. And so, and it is uncomfortable for me and other people that I do talk about this very often. And people don't particularly know what to do. But I think I love what you said, the it coming in drips, that I know that it's a process and I'm going to spend my whole life on it. It's not something, next week I'm going to say, I finally finished, This is
Yeah.
this is a lifelong thing and I'm committed to doing it. But I will say that while some people are uncomfortable and you can sort of tell that there is a tendency to say when I bring it up, because I'll say, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and that sexual abuse happened from the person who was sitting next to me at church. And so there's church hurt there. And so it's a place where I had to work to feel safe. Um, there are people who want to avoid that. And then there's also people who jump right up and say, oh, me too. This happened
Mm,
to me. Um, and I think that those moments that happen in church, at least in my experience, are getting a little longer and longer over time. And so, and, there, but historically, it's been sort of like, oh, I'm sorry, and then we move on.
mm,
And now I'm sort of noticing that, and goes back to what we were saying in the beginning, that I think people have gone through their clinical work, they've gone through their therapy, and they've been on their healing journey. And I will say, I think these conversations are really important too
Yeah.
because I know this is on, this is a podcast, so we don't get to go out and talk to all of the people who are listening. But I do think that this is a type of conversation where people can say, okay, that I'm not alone, even in my community.
Yeah.
If I can't find, a group of people who can hear my story, at least people will know that we're all out here. You're not alone. If you're feeling this way, if you're feeling like you're not surrounded by people who are very supportive and can know you authentically, and when I say that, um, I mean there's a great book, and I really loved the phrasing. It's called The Unsayable, and this can feel very much like when you have complex trauma or when you have any trauma that the community is uncomfortable with, it can feel like a very large part of your own experience is unsayable. Like you're not allowed to say what actually happened to you. And so I'm really noticing that improving, but also, again, I think these conversations are good. So if you're listening and you don't have people in your community, just know we're out there. And it's worth it to be vulnerable and to try to find, even if there's only a couple of people out of the hundreds of people who go to your church or whatever, wherever you go.
Yeah. Well, what you've been saying is so helpful. And I'm wondering, could you go into maybe a little bit more of some practical guidance on how churches and I would, families as well might respond or should respond when abuse is disclosed? If we could go there, like what matters the most in those first responses? And maybe you could provide a little bit of information about what might be some red flags that you might notice, or what might be the most common harmful responses that people think they're being helpful.
Yeah.
Maybe that would be good for our listeners. I'm interested in hearing as well about what would be what should we not do and what could we do that would be better.
Yeah. So what I think As we talked about earlier, I think education is the first step, and we're doing that, and we're on that process, which is good. But in that spirit, I think it's really important for parents and church administrators, or even Boy and Girl Scouts, or wherever you have children, is to understand that grooming is a process usually that takes place over a period of time. And this is the case also with family members, because there's also, there are a lot of family members who abuse children in their own family, as was the case with me. Um, and so grooming happens over time. And so it's not just the event that happened, that there was some sort of sexual encounter and that's all that happened. So grooming is the process of preparing the child to be abused. And so what that process entails is creating some sort of trust, false trust with the person who wants to abuse the child, and then creating some secrets with the child. And that can range, that has a very large range. It depends on what situation you're in and the age of the child sometimes. So for very young children, the perpetrator can offer candies and special treats, or so just some examples. I'll say, I remember I had a client who her grandfather offered her special tractor rides. Another one would this was also a grandfather. He would take her to the store and get her candies. I know in my case, my uncle would give us candy and let us play his board games. So that's for very young children. As children get older, oftentimes that can look like, the dirty jokes, and then maybe some alcohol or a little bit of drugs, or pornography eventually, often nowadays, comes into play. And the purpose of this is to make the survivor feel as though they've done something wrong, that they participated in this over time. So there's a feeling that there's the process in the grooming where the perpetrator is saying, would you like to have this? It's this sort of like, we're doing this together. And then the reason it starts off small and subtle, and we know this, by the way, perpetrators are very aware of what they're doing. I think this is also a misconception, that they're just dysregulated in a moment and they abuse in a moment, and that is not the case. So perpetrators will start small, because the child will be confused, like, oh, my youth pastor just told me a dirty joke, like, well, maybe that was not okay. So they have a little bit of a discomfort or something, but then they just move on. And so then it just grows over time. And again, the point of that, and this is something, again, perpetrators will say, the purpose of that is to confuse the child and make the child feel like they have participated in this. Which is another one of those reasons that people stop trusting their own intuition also. And so we get those little body signals when we know something isn't right. And the whole purpose of the grooming process is to drip that so small that at some point the child is in over their head. They think, okay, so I'm in too deep now. And then the sexual abuse happens. So that's important for parents and community members to know, that it's not just that. There's a whole untangling of relearning how to trust your intuition, of being able to regulate your body, of being able to sort of have conversations with people and say, what happened? And, how could I in the future keep myself safe? Because people need to know, how do I keep myself safe? And one of the ways that we can do that with our kids is to say, well, in the future, let's talk about all of these things. And I will say that one of the problems that I see in particular with all families really, but in the Christian community in particular, is a fear of the parents. They fear that they're going to get in trouble, that they've done something wrong. And so the message that we need to send if children share that they've been abused is you didn't do anything wrong. It's not your responsibility to police an adult's behavior. You're not in any trouble. And that's also a message that we can give kids before they're abused also, is to say, just so you know, these things are not your responsibility. This is mom and dad's responsibility or whoever your caregiver is. And so there's that. And then once a child discloses that they've been abused, then it's really important to follow the justice system. So in communities of faith, I will always say that this is a biblical point. It says in the Bible that you are supposed to follow the laws of the land as long as they're not in opposition to God's will. And, I don't think anybody is going to argue that protecting children from being sexually abused is against God's will. Um, so that process of shining the light on the abuse and making sure that the consequences go on the perpetrator and not the child is the process of healing
Mm.
and restoring and bringing in, all of that learning that the child needs to do following abuse about who is responsible, how to re-regulate, how do I keep myself safe, what happened, how do I trust people now because this person went out of their way to get me to trust them.
Mhm.
And so now,
Mhm.
how do I do this? And how do I feel safe in connection when somebody has manipulated and deliberately harmed me within that intimacy in the past? And so that's something that has to
Right.
be healed.
Right. So important. So important. Thank you. Yeah.
You talked about a tool that you've used, a simple practice, a 2-minute practice about orienting to safety that
Mhm.
really helps the nervous system and for them to have an actual physical experience of safety. Can
Mhm.
you talk about that a little bit to walk us through that and why it helps?
Well, are you talking about a specific one? I have so many.
Well, whichever one pops in. You were talking
Okay.
about where you pause and plant the feet, looking around the room,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
naming
yeah.
5 things, keeping it super simple, something you can do no matter where you are.
Yeah, so there are a couple of different types of ways people dissociate. And so
Mhm.
there's depersonalization and then there's derealization. So sometimes people can feel like they're not real, like their body
Mhm.
isn't real. Sometimes they can feel a disconnection from the environment. And so that's why we do this exercise. So when people start to dissociate and they're having trouble staying grounded, one of the things, and I'll do it right along because with as I describe it, so I'm gonna I have my legs folded. So I'm gonna put my legs on my feet on the ground. And so you plant your feet on the ground and then you take a breath. And one of the things that I try to tell my clients is that, the belly breath is really powerful. So that belly breath is the way that babies breathe when they're very relaxed, and you just let your body, let your belly relax, and then breathe in and let your belly fill up. And then if you can try to, you can count in your mind or out loud, you can count your inhale and then try to make that exhale at least 1 or 2 seconds longer, just to help you relax. And then what you can do is look around the room and you can find things. So like my screen is orange. So I would say that screen is orange. My glass container is green. I can hear the wind in the background is really strong. The light that is shining down on me is very bright. I don't smell anything in particular right now, so I can smell the sort of neutral. I can feel my thumbs on the pads of my fingers. I can feel the air entering my body and exiting my body. And so doing these things is just an orientation to say, my body is real, my body is here, it's grounded, I'm in this environment. The environment is real. I can feel a connection to the environment. And so that's really a counter to dissociation, is being present in the environment and then being present in your body.
Mm.
Yeah, I really appreciate too you taking the time to describe it and be very specific and really holding with so much care how the body needs to register it,
Mhm.
Mm.
and to acknowledge that and to experience that, then they can begin to actually experience coming back,
Yeah.
being present.
Mhm. Yeah.
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 And compassion. My body dissociated as a way to keep me from having to experience the pain of what was happening. And,
Yeah.
thank you, body.
Mhm.
Yeah, it sounds like you, well, and what I was experiencing as you did that with us is, you know, a calming, and perhaps this would be helping people to feel less confused, less ashamed, and
Mhm.
getting more clarity about what their next step would be.
Mhm.
And yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And would you have something that you would want to say to someone who is maybe confused in, endurance with just sticking it through with holiness?
Mhm. Yeah. So one of the things that, a lot of survivors tell me who have religious and faith trauma is, I can't, the church is difficult for me. Religious people are hard for me to be around because that's where I was hurt. And what I would say to those people is no one has a right to keep you from a relationship with your creator. So you have access to that. You have access to it directly. And you are the Bible says you are loved, you're perfectly made, you're worthy. You don't have to earn love. You are inherently lovable. You are inherently good. And so, if there had been people who claimed to be religious and harmed you or did not abide by those things, I would encourage people to say, I'm not going to look at my faith or my spirituality through your lens. I'm going to find my own lens to look at it through. Because I can have a relationship with holiness directly through my own experience. It doesn't have to be in line with what your pastor says. It doesn't have to be in line with what people in your community say. It doesn't have to be in line with what mainstream people say. That is your relationship with your creator and with holiness directly. And if somebody tries to tell you something about yourself that is in contrast to what you know to be true, which is that you are inherently lovable, you are inherently worthy, and you have a right to be safe, you are allowed to reject that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's so important to be very clear about that. It kind of brings us right back to where you were talking earlier about the importance of really taking responsibility for being a parent, for being somebody that is responsible for the care of children when they are in your environment. The importance of actually having those conversations. And this seems to be one of the places that there's gaps in our culture is whether people are truly being educated. Because
Mm.
babies, when they come, they don't come with an instruction manual. So and that's something I've heard say so many times. I've taught a lot of parenting classes myself, but to actually have places where they're nurtured. And that's the opposite of grooming. When you're
Mm.
nurtured, you're honored for being who you are. There's a respect that you can feel, your body can feel. And that's that neuroception of safety. But to really have spaces that are committed to honoring growth and development and the learning that needs to happen about what's safe and what's not safe, and to have places that it's safe to discover that.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And one of the things that I really like to recommend to churches is to make sure that they have a policy in place that includes the parents where you're having conversations with people about safety at church, and then offering services or support for people who have things going on in their life. I think that's a really important because I could not agree more. There have been so many children who were harmed at church or in Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or playing a sport,
Mm.
or in a school. And these are places where children should feel safe. And that can only happen systemically. And why the reason I say that is because Gail, you had mentioned earlier, are there red flags? And my answer is not really, because perpetrators are very good at mimicking healthy adults. And so when it happens, parents should also not blame themselves. It's the perpetrator who carries that responsibility, not the child or the parent. But it's we can protect children by creating environments where people feel comfortable talking and sharing, and as you said, Gloria, being nurtured, um, and where there is safety and not fear of punishment and not fear of getting into trouble all the time. And some of these old school messages that people have gotten, like, children are to be seen and not heard. No, no, we want to hear you. We want to hear what you have to
Yeah,
say. We want to know
yeah.
you. And so, yeah, I love that. I completely agree with you. And that, I think, is a work in progress.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's so important that just that summarized it so well, children are seen and not heard. No, we need to understand them more and look at what it is that's driving their behavior. What is it that's really wrong, instead of, oh, it's just, I can't deal with this, they've got to be quiet.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, Veronica, thank you so much for being here and bringing your clarity and compassion to this conversation. It's been beautiful.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you for having me.
Well, I appreciate the way that you really are out there helping people to truly understand, just not on a surface level, a visceral level, a deep spiritual level, about boundaries, about protection, truth telling, and accountability, and that they're not in conflict with your faith, and that you have direct access. That's so important as well. So
Yeah.
how can our listeners learn more about you and your work and be in touch or access resources you're aware of?
Yeah, so I just finished a book, and so hopefully that'll be coming out maybe early next year or sometime in that time frame. But I would love for people to visit my website, veronicathompson.com, and sign up for the newsletter. And as new things happen, I will send out a newsletter. And certainly when the book comes out, I'll send a newsletter. And the book is really meant to be a handbook for what do I do if it's sort of like, if you find out a child has been abused, this
Uh-huh.
is where you can start. And so
Mhm.
that's how I'm really trying to have a conversation with the community and say, I know people care about this issue and it's hard to talk about. So I want to give you the language to be able to talk about it. And I want to give you the know-how. I want you to know exactly what you're supposed to do, or what you can do to create healing after this has happened.
Um,
Yeah, that
well,
sounds like
that's
it'll be
wonderful.
very empowering. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll look forward to seeing this book come out.
Yeah, me
Thank
Yeah.
you.
too.
Thank
So,
you.
and then you can follow me on my socials as well. And there's a link from my website for those.
Great.
Okay, we'll have those
Good.
in the show notes.
And next week, we're joined by Tiffany O'Hearn for a conversation about nervous system awareness, conscious self-observation, and what it means to realize that you are not your reactions.
Yes, it's going to be a very grounded and illuminating conversation, and we hope that you'll join us.
Yes. And we'll be talking about how observing your inner world creates space between reaction and response, how grief shaped Tiffany's work in a deeper way, and a simple framework for you becoming more intentional in how you meet your emotions. Now, so until then, take gentle care of yourself.
Yes, and remember that all healing is relational.